I seriously considered calling this part 5 of 4. So here it is, folks, the final verdict. This is Blue Sky. Now the first thing I want to do is give huge shout outs to all the companies that made Blue Sky possible, and that's starting, of course, first off with AlphaCool, who supplied almost everything that you're seeing in the build. They supplied the two 360mm radiators, they supplied all of the PETG tubing, all 60 feet or so of the PETG tubing, all of the fittings that you see in here, as well as the reservoir and the pump. They also had a ton of stuff sent over that was necessary for work behind the scenes that you obviously aren't seeing in this build. But pretty much anything that you could possibly want, including a variety of graphics card water block support, is offered on Aquatuning AlphaCool websites. I have the US version, Aquatuning US, and then also the original AlphaCool that's all in German for my German viewers out there. Both of the sites are linked in the description. Check them out. If you're building any kind of custom loop PC, I do recommend that you start there. They have literally everything. Now, another prominent feature of this build that I cannot go without mentioning is the Lian Li PC 011. I don't know if it's the 011 or just the 11 and the O's silent. Anyway, it's a beautiful tempered glass case. I want to give a personal shout out to Trevor for hooking me up with this thing. I really wanted to go with a Lian Li case for this build. I admire the company. I think they make some of the best looking cases on the market. It's always been my dream to own a case like this, so I'm glad that this was able to happen. I don't think any other case would have made Blue Sky look any better than it already does. I also want to thank V1 Tech for supplying these beautiful back plates, the blue accents of which match the fluid almost perfectly, as well as Mod My Mods for supplying this beautiful CPU block here. I was looking for something that was a bit darker of a blue shade to match the darker blue in these cables that Tony from Virility supplied, and this was it. I mean, this was, once I saw it, he sent a picture of it. He's like, hey, I can send one of these over tomorrow. And I was like, heck yes, this is the perfect piece to make the blue shades of this build come together. I didn't want it to be just one solid shade of blue. I think that's a little boring. And when Tony showed the cables that he had, and he had those two different shades in there, I knew that the rest of this build was going to follow suit with that. That was just something that I wanted personally. You see tons of just, monochromatic builds, but I like a bit of diversity, and that's what Blue Sky now brings to the table. Thermaltake supplied the two GTX 1080 water blocks. These look very similar to the EK water blocks, and I'm glad they didn't deviate much from this design. I want to give a personal shout out to Jack over at Thermaltake for overnighting these blocks, making this happen the next day. I sent him an email at like 2:50 p.m. And then the next morning, those blocks were literally here. So huge shout out for making that happen. That's the reason why part 4 was as early as it was, and that's why I was able to complete the build much earlier than I had anticipated. I originally had the parallel bridge connecting the two cards, but that actually impeded the SLI bridge connectors to the left, and it came very far over to the left and almost blocked the connectors entirely. And this will depend on the kinds of cards you use and how far away the GPU is from those SLI connectors. So it's all about PCB design. In this case, it didn't really work out. This is the reference GTX 1080 PCB we're talking about here. So what I had to do was use the two included fluid connectors. One came with each card, and then I cut small, just cuts of PETG tubing and put those in between the fluid connectors to, obviously complete the loop. Now you're probably wondering why I have the Trident Z RGB RAM set to an RGB setting. I originally intended to have those DIMMs oscillating between like a light blue and a dark blue, but the software support for x99 platforms is not here yet. I tried downloading it and just to see if it would work. It does not, so I have to wait for that beta support to arrive for x99 platforms. Until then, it's going to be RGB-ish, but that it will be blue. I guarantee you it will be blue once that software support arrives. But just a general comment on the DIMMs themselves. The RGB functionality is superb. You can literally replicate any color you want. Neon green, no problem. Yellow, no problem. Pink, no problem. And I've seen the software being run on other platforms that are supported at this point, and you have total customizability. So these DIMMs aren't the cheapest, admittedly. They're going to cost you over $100 for a 16 gig kit, but they're gonna look super sexy in that new rig of yours. Now, something I wanted to mention in regard to part 2 of 4 of the Project Blue Sky series is how raw I was with all of you about the PETG tube bending process. I caught a lot of flack for being unprepared and not doing my homework. People even accused me of not watching YouTube instructionals before going about the process, which in and of itself is a ridiculous claim. What I did do was show you the learning curve. That was the learning process, and there is a curve there. It's not something you can just pick up and do. It takes time, it takes practice, it is an art. And I think any of the professionals, I guess you could call them, who have been doing this for a long time, would admit the same thing. But I even emphasized at the end of that video that once you get through the first couple of hurdles, the first day or so is going to be rough if it's your first time. Once you get used to how far away to hold the PETG tubing from the heat gun, how much of the tube to heat up when you're going about bending the tubing, then you're gonna be smooth sailing. And at this point, I can pretty much make any PETG bend that I want the first time around without screwing up, and have that be good to go. So if you don't appreciate the honesty, the upfront kind of learning curve discussion in my videos, this isn't the channel for you. It's just something that I will always do because I'm not going to act like I'm an expert in something that I haven't done before, and I'm not going to try to learn it and rush through the process and then create an instructional video, because there are plenty of those out there from people who have already done it many times. So I'd rather set myself apart in another way and just be honest about the process altogether. I will say it pays off, so just keep practicing. If this is your first time doing something like this, keep doing it. Just come up with some hypothetical bends, try doing some crazy stuff, and if you can do all of that, then you can pull off the bends necessary to build a computer, much like Project Blue Sky. So I saved a surprise announcement for last, and that is that I will be undergoing a new custom loop PC build, changing one variable mainly. That is, I will not be using PETG this time around, but glass tubing. So we'll be using a bunch of fittings. We'll have Primo Chill predominantly on board with this one, and then we'll have maybe some other components like graphics card blocks from other vendors. We'll be using a Define S from Fractal Design, plenty of water cooling potential in a mid-tower size form factor, a motherboard I believe from Gigabyte, 2 RX 480s, and a 1700X because Ryzen is the hot topic. So stay tuned for that. I actually have a few rough drafts already up, but you guys know that is subject to change, definitely. The end result with Project Blue Sky looked nothing like how I planned it, envisioned it in my head. But I did just, jump into this whole thing right away. I didn't start with soft tubing or anything. I wanted to go all out, and that's why there was such a big learning curve for me. But at this point, I'm very comfortable, and glass is up next. With that, I hope you've enjoyed the Project Blue Sky series. This video here marks the finale, the finished product. I know there's some things that a few of you aren't going to like. You might not like the coolant, you might not like the RGB RAM the way they are. There's always something that someone's going to complain about, but this is my build, and I love it exactly the way it is, and that's all that matters. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, thumbs down for the opposite. Click the subscribe button if you haven't already. I will catch you in the next video. This is Salazar Studio. Thanks for building with us.